Cardano will be the most decentralized blockchain in the world. At EMURGO, we've really beefed up our team to proactively engage the existing Cardano community and understand what are people working on, where are the gaps. A lot of this space is very tech heavy. So where people or projects might be missing some skill set is the marketing side, the business development, or indeed outright sales. We are also going past Cardano to look at people who are building on other chains. What's to stop you from building on Cardano? I don't believe that we should be going out to anyone and everyone saying, here's Web3, here's Web3, here's Web3. It's more a case of what do you do? What problems do you face? And we can now flesh out those discussions to say, okay, well, here's a thing that might work for you. The audience is vast and varied. You need to alter your pitch depending on where they are on the curve. Can I do my Chewbacca impression?
Hello and welcome to another episode of Token Talks, brought to you as ever from our studio here in sunny Singapore, where the aircon is always set to high. Today, I'm really excited to invite a guest onto the show from EMURGO. His name is Nikhil, and Nikhil, you are COO of EMURGO. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sam. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited. First time I'm doing something like this, so slightly nervous, but it's okay. There's still enough alcohol in the system from the F1 weekend, which is placating everything.
Yeah, I should kind of start by saying that it was the F1 in Singapore yesterday. So if voices are a little bit croaky, it's because we were all singing along to Robbie Williams and cheering the races on.
Yeah, or making the noises of cars, as I tend to do.
Cool. It would be great to hear a little bit about who you are and kind of what you do at EMURGO to kick things off.
Yeah, as you rightly said, I am the COO of EMURGO. EMURGO is a pioneering entity of the Cardano blockchain. So there are three entities. IOG, which many people are probably familiar with. That's where Charles Hoskinson sits, and it's historically been looking after the R&D side and the tech development of the blockchain. Then we have the Cardano Foundation, which, as many foundations, is a not-for-profit and responsible for propagation of the ecosystem. It's based in Switzerland. And then we have EMURGO. We're headquartered here in Singapore, and our mandate is to really propagate and facilitate the commercial adoption of Cardano. We are roughly 115 people globally. The highest concentration of that is here in Singapore, where we have just under 30 people, and then scattered across Indonesia, India, and then Europe and the Americas. Our business comprises a number of things, actually. So you can almost think of us as a conglomerate of mini startups. I'll break them down. So we have a ventures arm which looks to invest in predominantly Cardano-based projects. We have, and they typically come in pre-series, so rather early on. We have a business that focuses on Africa as a geography, and this will invest, but will also be looking more at incubation and infrastructure side of things. And then we have what I refer to as our kind of operate and build businesses, and that's what I look after. And so within that, we have a fintech product suite of products. We have a social content platform called Cardano Spot, and that's a way to bring the community together and a one-stop shop to understand what's going on in the Cardano space, who's who, what are they doing, and a way to bring people together. We have a pretty extensive education offering, which historically at least has very much been focused on the more technology aspects of education. But going forward, it's going to be focusing equally on a non-technology audience and educating on the non-technology content, right? Mm-hmm. So here as opposed to how does the technology work and going into the depths and the weeds of that, it's going to focus a bit more on here's some of the tech that you need to understand so you get how it works, but then how can you apply that? So the commercial application. we're then also looking to build another team going forward, which is going to allow us to incubate or strategically invest in businesses, all again with a view to looking at what is the commercial opportunity. So that's a number of things that EMURGO does, but if I maybe take a step back for a second and explain where is Cardano, that it may make sense why we're taking this approach. So I guess Cardano gets a bit of flack sometimes for having taken such a long time to get to where it's at, right? Especially relative to an Ethereum, for example. But if we look at when its smart contract functionality came out, which was just before the bear market kicked in, right? So it hasn't had a chance yet to really have that same traction, that same momentum for commercial adoption. So you have a lot of people actually building away and developing in the background, and there's some very cool stuff going on. But with the way the prices are, it's not really attracting, as in the space overall, crypto is not attracting the same engagement that we saw, a couple of years ago. And so we think it's just a matter of time, right, as we come back into that bull market, that we will be well placed to actually start to crystallize some of that commercial adoption. And so we don't know exactly where this space is going to land, but we know the direction of travel. And so we're taking a broad approach in terms of where we engage. And I like to think of it simply as where do we think the commercial opportunity will be, and how do we plant the seeds now to really see the fruits of our labors, should we say, a year from now or so. The opportunity for me lies both in terms of playing within crypto native space, but equally going to non-Web3 folks. And here we could refer to them as Web 2 or equally non-Web, right? And start to get a grip on what are their pain points and how might blockchain or Web3 as an umbrella term help them, right? So that's where we go out to numerous companies and projects and try and see how we can work with them, rather than kind of pushing with, this is Web3 and you've now got to embrace it, right? You tend to lose the audience if you take that approach.
Super exciting. I mean, thanks for explaining and kind of giving a bit of the lay of the land of the ecosystem, I guess. So I'm really intrigued, I guess, more about you personally, because you've kind of been tasked at EMURGO with really exciting role regarding, commercialization and mainstream adoption of technology and use cases. How did you get into this space in the first place? What was it that kind of motivated you to get into the blockchain industry?
So my background is banking.
Yep.
So I was with a global investment bank in London, and then that brought me to Singapore. The space where I was involved within banking was very interesting, and a lot of people wanted that skill set sort of anywhere between 2008 and 2013. From about 2013, especially in this part of the world, it felt like there wasn't as much demand. And so by this point, I'd already been with the bank for 9 years, but also waning interest and appetite, especially for the thing that I did, wasn't really here in this region. And I didn't want to go back to the UK. I like living in Singapore. I've been here for 10 years. So I was trying to figure out how to keep myself relevant, but also interested in what I was doing. And so I stepped out of that rather niche space, I would call it, into something more broad, right? But that kind of coincided with the bank that I was at, sort of taking a view around 2016 that it didn't really want a significant presence in Asia. And so that prompted me to think about, well, okay, what else can I do in a bank, any other bank, in any other location? It took me a while to get there, but I realized that there was no position, no role, no country. There was nothing within banking that really interested me anymore. I had a number of discussions with colleagues and whatnot about where can I go. The idea of working in a startup was interesting, but I'd never been in that space. And I would have advice from friends and colleagues saying, hey, listen, don't underestimate how well we're paid for how little risk we take on. And that really grated on me, right? And because I wanted to be paid if I was good at something and not be paid if I wasn't good at it. I was comfortable with that idea. So, people talk about glass ceilings, right? And this isn't actually, not in the way that most people talk about it, but there is a glass ceiling where you're just in, especially in a large institution, there's either the commercial kind of stagnation that it may suffer from, or just the politics that apply in a place like that. And so it really grated. And that was the catalyst for me to go, right, I want to have a go at being in startup space. But then the question became, well, how do I get there? And what would I do? And what part of startup space would I play in? The obvious place was fintech, just because I came from a financial services background. But even that was already quite a broad term. And I didn't exactly know how to chop it up and where my interests may lie. So I started putting my hand up for various things in the bank with a view to, well, I don't know what it might be, but I'll have a crack at it, and maybe that will give me an indication of whether it's for me or not. So at one point, this particular my employer wanted to have set up a hackathon in Asia, all to do with post-trade settlement and using blockchain. Now, everyone kind of assumes that when you work in a bank, you know everything about banking. But of course, that's not the case, especially if you're in an organization that's, probably at that point around 80,000 people. And so I didn't really know what a hackathon was. I didn't really know what post-trade settlement was. And I definitely hadn't heard of blockchain. So I put my hand up for it. I said, yeah, come on, let's go. And so I helped to put this thing together. And I that was kind of my segue to blockchain, right? And ultimately the catapult for me to leave. And I came across a startup that was trying to build some sort of solution to facilitation of trade, and then ultimately access to trade finance on blockchain, which is quite often rolled out as the killer use case for blockchain. I would disagree, but I'll come back to that in a while. But I joined that startup, and in capacity as CFO, actually, so kind of playing to my sort of finance background. Yeah. Stayed there for about 18 months. But during those 18 months, kind of realized two things. One, the limitations of blockchain. Two, the hard sell of selling blockchain to any kind of organization, right? Because this was trade related, you'd have the larger players, and they're pretty savvy, right, on technological aspects of what they do. But equally SMEs, and this could be 2-man, 3-man kind of shops, and they are not tech savvy at all. And so either way, going in and selling blockchain as an answer was really tough. The other part of this was I just realized I wasn't that interested in trade finance or supply chain. It wasn't really where I had played when I was in banking. So I wasn't particularly familiar with it, and it didn't interest me. That's not to say it's not important. It clearly is, but it just wasn't my thing. So I decided to leave that particular company, and then I spent quite some time taking a step back and going, okay, let's just look at this whole space. And at that, we were probably at the back end of the NFT summer, I think, by that point. And the way I looked at it, there was places like exchanges or trading platforms that were doing kind of what banks did, but with a different asset class. And for me, that was a bit too close to home. And I thought, well, if I'm going to go into this space, then I want to try something quite different. And on the other end of the scale, there were, art DAOs and fashion DAOs. And I didn't really know what it meant, but it sounded cool. And so I wanted to go across that spectrum and see what people were up to. And I used that as a way to network, particularly in Singapore, and then more broadly across Southeast Asia, to figure out where I want to play. And somewhere along that, in parallel, I had met Ken, who's my boss, the CEO of EMURGO Group, and we had chatted on and off for a period of time, and then it kind of culminated where the timing was right. And so I joined EMURGO about a year ago, and I like the fact that it's broad brush, right? We're trying different things. We're looking for where is there a commercial opportunity, not necessarily trying to put all of our eggs in one industry or geographical basket, right? And the risk that you have if you were to take that approach is it's a square peg in a round hole, right? For me, this space is still very nascent, so you can't be too rigid in your thinking.
Yeah, but that's something I'd love to ask you about. So I mean, I think you have quite a unique perspective in this space, right? Because you're somebody who's operated at the very kind of highest levels of traditional finance and centralization, and then now kind of the highest levels of non-traditional finance and decentralization. How are we doing? Where do we stand? You obviously really understand the limitations of what's possible given where you kind of were working before. How do you think we're doing in terms of path to adoption, to real life use cases?
Yeah. So I'll start off by explaining what was the penny dropping moment for me.
Yeah,
right?
please do. Yeah.
So I had been involved in working with a lot of securitization type activity when I was in banking, and so this really just is about whatever, financing properties, for example, or refinancing properties and then packaging it up and selling it out. And it's a good way of people getting the credit and financing they need, right? In this, should we say, for buying a property, and then spreading that risk out, right? So the bank or the main lender will just pass it out the back door, and you diversify, or you mitigate your risk, and people get to diversify their own portfolio. And so that's it. That's all it's doing. The penny drop moment for me was, okay, so now you've got like these things called tokens, and you can fractionalize those tokens, and theoretically, at least, you could now pass them out to retail, for example. So someone with $10 of investable assets who would never get a look into being involved in the financing or refinancing of, given we're here in Singapore, I'll say Marina Bay Sands, right? Now has a means of accreting wealth by buying that fractionalized token. Right? So it's a very conceptual, theoretical way that this could work. And that's where I kind of the penny dropped, because it was an application that I understood. And now we're talking about a format of digitization, but also a way to get it out to people who don't normally get a look in. So that's what wanted me to come into this space. I think though that the words blockchain, Web3, crypto all mean different things to different people. And so there are those who are very staunchly about breaking the banking system or certainly disrupting it heavily. Those that are very interested in digital nation states and privacy from government as well, all the way through to perhaps just folks who are less interested in that and just want to use the technology because it allows you to do something a bit slick, right? And so what I see is that sometimes the conversations conflate the terminology, and people make assumptions about what they mean when they're using a particular term. And no right or wrong with that. I think it just needs, it needs the conversation to unpack what's my starting point, what's my motivation, and what am I trying to do with this technology? And then people can level set. But talking simplistically, that's not done. And so that's why you see traditional press, right, being heavy naysayers on crypto and blockchain, because I guess the separation of the technology from what people are doing with that cryptocurrency as a means to speculate, or indeed in some instances rip people off, right, is all talked about as one thing. And sometimes it suits people's agenda to do it that way, right? So I think it's all wrapped up in a lack of awareness on one side, and on the other side, it's a need for better communication, right? And so quite often what you find in this space is that there's a lot of high IQ, less so on the EQ side of things, right? And I think it was the old adage, right? In the sales space, like win the argument, lose the sale, right? So picking a fight with everyone who's a naysayer is not necessarily going to get them on board, right? So we need to kind of learn how to use the right language for the audience that you're talking to, but also appreciate that the audience is vast and varied. And so you need to alter your pitch depending on where they are on the curve. And these, I'm talking very simplistically because I have to, because there are so many types of audience in this instance, right? But we could probably start off with something like regulators, right? Where clearly we can see that there's a real spread, right? From one side of the world to the other on how much they understand, how much they even seem to want to engage, right? And so how do you have that conversation? And is it simply incumbent on those folks who are in a regulated activity space to have that conversation with regulators, or should other players, for example, layer ones, right, also be at the table to say, hey guys, there's nuance here, and you need to understand that. So there's a technology, and in the way you might just think about any technology as just a technology, you could think of, crypto as that, or blockchain as that, right? However, in this instance, at least on the public permissionless side, it comes with this concept of crypto. And that's kind of needed to do things like the validation of whatever's on the block. But it also has an intrinsic value. And the regulators are probably very excited about the speculation of the asset price and throwing the blockchain into that consideration. But the risk that they face, the risk that we then face collectively, is that they throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So there's good stuff, and there's some stuff that they probably do need to care about legitimately. They do to protect, certainly retail customers, but perhaps more broadly certain types of institution. But we wouldn't want them to, and I don't think they ultimately will want to get to a point where they inadvertently kill the powerful, opportunity that this whole thing brings.
So how do you, you don't have to speak on behalf of EMURGO or Cardano, but how do you see things panning out kind of from a regulatory perspective over, let's say, the next 6 to 12 months? Like, what are kind of any milestones or key things you think we need to be aware of?
So I think, again, broad brush comments, but Asia is definitely ahead of the curve. Then I think Middle East, Europe, and then the US. I'm actually not that familiar with the LATAM side, so I'll probably stay quiet on that one. But we've definitely seen, there was this ping pong between Singapore and Hong Kong over the last few years. Hong Kong seems to have done a bit of a U-turn in terms of acceptance of crypto. There's now a delineation between what can be done on the China side. And there they are very open to, like, we want blockchain, we like the technology, we want stuff to happen. And then across the border in Hong Kong, there is, on crypto trading itself, much more acceptance from the Hong Kong regulator. Singapore, at least maybe 18 months or maybe 2 years ago, was kind of looking like it was heading in that space, and then has done a bit of a retreat. But they've been pretty open and transparent that they like blockchain, they like crypto, but it needs to be within the institutional space. They don't want it going to retail. And I think that's understandable because, again, lack of awareness, lack of education. You don't want people blowing themselves up, right, without knowing what they're doing. I do think it leads to a separate question on how do you define retail. So you have, I know it differs, from one country to the next, but you have, in my mind at least, slightly artificial constructs like accredited investor, which, might be something like, well, you've got to be earning over 300K a year or have at least $2 million of net assets. Well, there's plenty of those people and they're still idiots, right? So I think we need to find a better way of determining who really are the vulnerable folks who might be exposed to some downside that they don't understand they are exposed to. Dubai, I think, is clearly setting itself out as a dominant player in this space. Abu Dhabi, I think, I'm hearing more and more about Saudi. I don't know exactly where those regulations sit, but I certainly know that they are very bullish on their own capability in the tech space, and then that of course leads to blockchain in any way, right?
They're bullish on absolutely everything,
yeah. which is good to hear, right? I mean, they're clearly thinking about how they stay relevant, right, going forward. I think UK and Europe's an interesting one, right? So Mika's broadly positive, right? And then now we need to see how it's been agreed somewhat conceptually, and now it's at a point where it needs to figure out how do you implement that. Yep. And this will be interesting, which going back to the role I did in banking days, you get some very interesting kind of outcomes as what is as there's a little bit of kind of horse trading that goes on as you move from that conceptual to the implementation stage. But without getting into the details of that, I think at least we'll have certainty. And I think that's perhaps more important than are the regulations super friendly, right? Great if they are super friendly, at least for those players who are trying to do the right thing. But for those players who have a deliberate nefarious agenda, then for the rest of the population, that's probably not a good thing. More importantly is certainty, because then you know the rules of the road and you know how to play within that framework. So I'm hoping that will land in a good place. The UK is an interesting one because I think they now have reason to try and implement regulation that gives the UK an advantage over Europe post-Brexit. So how do they go about doing that, right? I don't know, but I suspect that's what they'll be gunning for, right? To try and carve out that differentiation from their European neighbours. And then I think the US is just a Pandora's box as far as I'm concerned. There are so many. It's complex as a region, right? You have laws and regulations that apply at a national level. Then you have at a state level, you have states compete, vying for position. Some are more friendly to this space than others are. So just even before you get into blockchain or crypto, right? That's a complex framework to deal with. Now bring it back to the whole crypto space. It's very difficult to understand where they're going to land up because every morning you kind of wake up and read, well, 50% of the states said this and 50% of the states said something else. Headlines tend to focus on the SEC and Gary Gensler, but, not professing to be an expert on US law or anything like that, but, I think it's more nuanced than what he has to say. But of course, that's headline grabbing. So I don't really know about the US. It does feel to me, though, like they're doing a good job at shooting themselves in the foot. And that other parts of the world are going to be able to take advantage of that. And that's another point with having inconsistent regulation, is that you create this unlevel playing field. And so both at a national level as well as an organizational level and possibly even at an individual level, you get inadvertent losers as a consequence of that unlevel playing field, right? So I think we've already seen noise, right, of some larger organizations talking about turning the volume down in the US, possibly even moving their headquarters altogether. I don't know how much of the election will change any of this, but I suspect there'll need to be a material trigger event, and that could be an election. It could be I don't know, a large a large crypto player simply exiting and taking however many thousands of jobs, and that will force a conversation right in the US. But for me, it's very muddy. And it's muddy because it's a large, complex framework. It's muddy because of the noises are changing from that part of the world.
Yeah, it's really complicated situations. I mean, anecdotally speaking, is in the context of Token 2049, which was in Singapore recently, and speaking to friends and partners from the States who were over, they were I think to a man super excited by kind of the sense of community and helping each other out, and kind of the support ecosystem that exists on this side of the world in Asia. And they're kind of referring to the fact that in the US at the moment it feels like everybody's a lot more guarded about what they're working on, and things are happening behind closed doors. So 3 or 4 founders I spoke to last week were talking about moving to Singapore because they were just so impressed by kind of everything that's going on here. So see how that pans out. And then the other thing that springs to mind for me is for those of us that are kind of building stuff on this side of the world, the unfortunate consequence for North American users is that they just can't participate anymore, right? So it's gone from, maybe there are 1 or 2 products or services that you can't use to kind of just a blanket. It's really difficult to onboard any North American users to lots of things on this side of the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there will be a bit of an exodus of talent from the US. I actually think some of that applies to, just coming back to this region for a second, like somewhere like India, which blows hot and cold, right, on how friendly or unfriendly they are towards crypto. And it's a shame because, there's such a huge talent pool there. So I think that there'll be some kind of, mass migration that we'll see, right? And historically, talking in, should we say, banking terms, right? So Asia has waited to see how US and Europe adopt certain things, and then they follow. But in this space, that doesn't need to happen, and culturally, it's not happening. Right? Asia is moving much faster now than well, at least it feels that way to me. Asia is moving faster than the US and Europe, not just at a regulatory level. I think with players in the space. I do think though a way to maybe mitigate or take some of the heat out of that regulation question is a bit more adoption of blockchain away from what might be deemed as security, for example, because that's the hot potato for the States, right? I know a lot of people are quite down on NFTs, but I think they're going to have a resurrection, right? And this time it will very much be focused on utility, and I can definitely see that high-end type of activity, right, be it manufactured goods or just high-end activity like whatever, flying your own fighter jet or something, right? That's where they will have a really useful role to play, and something like that is going to act as a bit of a gateway to allowing people to understand what the benefits are. And then you're not distracted with things, or to a lesser extent, you're not distracted with things like regulation, or are you buying this thing which might 10x, 100x overnight type of thing, right? And it's just, I've got this cool thing and it sits in my phone and it allows me to do cool stuff. Right? And so it may be that there's a bit of a sequencing or a domino effect here, right? Where the slightly more mundane, not to suggest NFTs and whatnot are mundane, but they are relative to something like DeFi, right? So getting something like that through, or indeed, people talk about tracking provenance and things like that. Again, it's a little bit, it's not headline grabbing, but it will demonstrate that there is a real usage, right, to blockchain, and then that helps separate the conversation between the blockchain, and yes, there is a cryptocurrency attached to it, where you're talking about a public blockchain at least, right? And that it has value, and its value is determined from that thing that it's doing underneath it. Right now, cryptocurrencies go up, down, and sure, there's a bit of not a bit, there's quite a lot of talk around, is that a function of X or Y? Is it correlated to this or is it correlated to that? But fundamentally, that price in my mind is just a guess at what the future value blockchain promises to deliver, right? Maybe with the exception of Bitcoin, right? Because that's just a pure case of do you want it or do you not want it? Anything with a smart contract comes with something a lot more intrinsic in terms of what it can bring. Indeed. So there's, I guess, going to be a point, a bit like just if we were talking about startups and valuations and coming in as an investor, you put so much in at a certain valuation because you expect so much value to be delivered back in the longer term. And not like VCs who are in there to kind of, invest and then get out at whatever 3, 5, 10, 20 times X, right? And whoever's left holding the buck at the last point is the loser, right? I think from a more kind of conceptual point of, if you are building something, what value does it bring? And that is your real valuation, right?
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So Nikhil, let's change tack a little bit and bring it back to EMURGO and Cardano, and not least because I know that whenever we launch any kind of a survey or question to our community on the bake side, the most requested products and services that come back always related to Cardano and ADA. So I think we have a bunch of people in the community who are really interested in what you guys are working on. I know that you and your team spend a lot of time traveling around the world, participating in meetups, academy events, hackathons, etc., spending time with the communities from your ecosystem. What do you see going on within the Cardano ecosystem at the moment that's really excites you and kind of gets you out of bed every day? And what's new and exciting that you know about?
Okay, so I say 80%-ish of our employees have been here for less than 18 months.
Right.
So it's quite a new organization. So we're quite small for quite a long time and then kind of grew rather quickly. And so we've got a really strong team and very ambitious and very driven. And I think within Cardano, people have really started to feel that and see our presence over the last probably 7 or 8 months, I guess. And so we're increasingly engaging with projects that are building on Cardano today. And I guess, in the past, did we invest in that project? Yes or no? Okay, and then kind of that was the end of that, right? But we're moving more towards, well, even if we don't, what can we do with you guys? How can we be a commercial partner, if not necessarily just an investment partner? We are also going past Cardano to look at people who are building on other chains, right? To see, well, what's to stop you from building on Cardano? Like what, is it a technology point or is it something else, right? And now we haven't had a chance to do anything with it because I'd say it's too early for that. We're in listening mode effectively, right? To understand why did someone pick that layer 1 or probably layer 2 rather than Cardano, right? And there are some technological hurdles that we still need to overcome, and that's fine. That's a question of time. But at least we can ready ourselves in the right way. So yeah, a lot of the traveling we've been doing over the last few months is really to go and get closer to community members. I think a significant thing that's happening at the moment within Cardano, which I think is probably not very well known or understood outside, is we're kind of moving into the last stage of Cardano's roadmap, something called Voltaire. And this is about making what's already a pretty decentralized layer 1 into an even more decentralized layer 1. And so, we have 3 pioneering entities, right? EMURGO being one of them. But we are now going to move, and this will take some time, to a point where there is a mechanism and a framework in place that fundamentally allows ADA holders to vote for all sorts of decisions on technological aspects of the blockchain, on how resources or treasury is used for certain aspects, things like that. So it's a big old piece of work, but the main point here is it will be by far the most decentralized blockchain out there. And that gives a lot of, I think, reason for people who are worried about how that might mitigate certain risks that they're still worried about, cause to actually come in and look at the space overall. As I mentioned before, I think there's a lot of building and developing going on. And what we as an ecosystem haven't managed to do just yet is get that real material commercial adoption. And that's where we are working within the ecosystem aggressively and increasingly, but equally now going outside, right? So indeed, just, should we say, traditional Web 2 players and saying, hey, do you want to come and play in this space? What, can we talk to you about what problems or opportunities that you think this technology may provide for you, and then we can work with you on that. So that last one especially is super exciting for me, because that gives us the opportunity to really go further afield. The risk you face if you're just within, should we call it a crypto native ecosystem, is that it's an echo chamber, right? And so how do we take those, I don't want to use the word arguments, but the rationale, right? Because again, I don't want to win the argument, lose the sale kind of principle that keeps going around in my head. But how can you bring people into this space, right? Increase the TVL by people coming in.
And really interesting. What types of Web2 company are you guys talking with then?
It's a big spread.
Yeah. Okay.
So and this is what's interesting, because we have been scratching our heads on, well, should we go after one industry, for example? Should we go after a geography? Should we go after something else? It's all a question of how do you skin this particular cat, right? And I'm sure there's right and wrong answers at the same time. But our view is that in the same way that you would have, I don't know, like really fundamentally a wheel, right? Okay, the obvious one is a car, right? But a wheel can be used in other contexts. So we kind of need to listen to be able to go to be a bit more defined around that. How do you carve up the problem statement or the market that you're going after? And so again, I don't believe that we should be going out to anyone and everyone saying, here's Web3, here's Web3, here's Web3. It's more a case of, what do you do? What problems do you face? Are you familiar with Web3 at all? And if not, let us help you understand a bit more. And now that you understand it a bit more, do you envisage there are certain opportunities? And we can now flesh out those discussions to say, okay, well, here's a thing that might work for you, right? So, but to coming back to your question, these government level, non-banking, non-financial services sector, financial sector, right? There's many use cases, right? And what's interesting that going across that spread, in most instances, those folks who are coming to us, right? So, which is cool. But what we need to do is do a bit more outbound, if you like, right? For those that are not necessarily aware of it yet.
Stepping away from Cardano, EMURGO, and I guess just, you're a guy who has your finger on the pulse. I know you have passionate interests beyond that. Is there a use case for blockchain that you would love to see come to fruition that maybe somebody else hasn't thought of just yet?
Well, I'm sure people have thought of it, but what I really would like to see. So, a lot of people talk in the blockchain space, talk about breaking a bank. I've had so many conversations with, I just want to break a bank and then I'll be happy. And I personally would like to break insurance, because and I've never worked in insurance, but I'm on the receiving end of that. And I think it's a very, very stale, old industry that is ripe for disintermediation. I also think the legal industry, not just by making everything on a smart contract, but I'm sure there's more levels of sophistication to it than that. But I think that is ripe for disintermediation. But away from the kind of the corporate side of things, and this is kind of coming more to like what do I really enjoy is film and music.
Okay,
right. So I think certainly music, and there's quite a few projects in this space already, trying to bring more equanimity between the creator and the fan, right? And so it's great that there's traction in that space already. The problem today, of course, right, is that the artist creates everything that they create, and then all the middlemen squeeze them dry, and so it's very difficult to find a means to both get your content out, but then also be compensated for it in monetary terms. And so the idea of bringing more equanimity in that through the use of, first of all, cutting out the middlemen, bringing some kind of token format in there, I think is super exciting. I think the ability then for coming back to my earlier example about financing property, the same idea applies here, right? You could effectively finance your future cash flows of music that you're going to create and sell that as a token or something to your user base. So you get the cash up front, allows you to fund the production of your next album, shall we say, and then they have rights over that, as well as the typical kind of NFT
POAPs and stuff like that.
10% off t-shirts and access to VIP areas and things like that. So there is movement in this space. I think it's super exciting. I think being able to get access, just as a music fan, right, being able to access more music and some of the cool stuff that comes with that, right, as well as then knowing that those artists are actually not having to continue busking on a high street somewhere, right, to make money is quite a good story all around. And again, the financing part of it makes sense coming from banking days. Like I remember seeing sort of Michael Jackson's catalog being securitized and things like that. So it's very intuitive. Just on the film part of things, and this is where I get super animated, right? So I'm a big film fan. I haven't really liked anything that's come out of Hollywood, and clearly film doesn't just come out of Hollywood. It comes from all sorts of other places. But if I'm just using Hollywood as an indicator for a second, it's just meaningless, right? The Marvel franchises, can I swear?
Please.
It's useless.
That is not a swear word.
That's how strongly I feel about it. I didn't even swear. Right. So what would be cool, right, I reckon, and I don't know enough about how you make a film, right, to see if this would work. But everyone got excited last year, right, when, is it called Squid Game? The Squid Games?
Yeah.
I
don't actually know or
Squid Game.
Squid Game.
Okay, right. So everyone got excited because it was a thing from Korea, and no one's ever watched anything from Korea, right? Basically, but it was a very cool idea, and now and that kind of has, at least for the Netflix crowd audience, it's given them a taste of what else can come from a non-US market, and so just imagine how much more rich, very cool storylines there are out there that just never see the light of day because either someone doesn't know how to get their scripts out there, or it's being dismissed because it's for whatever reason that these production companies decide. So at least conceptually, in my mind, there's a format here that blockchain allows where you could have people pitching their scripts, right? And for a community to look through and go, oh, okay, this looks really cool. you now have a mechanism for all aspects of the film production to be funded by that community. You have people in that community who will then be able to do things like sound, camera work, editing, etc., 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 right? And take it through to a format where it can be distributed. Right? It's all very, very conceptual. And again, I don't know. While I love film, I don't know how films are made. But it does strike me as a format that could work.
Yeah.
And simply being able to now watch things which are more meaningful than anything Marvel related, or certainly all of the Star Wars stuff since Disney bought it, right, is very exciting. Like in my mind, there's just stuff that Chris Nolan makes at the moment, right, or Marvel. That's it. They're your two options, and I definitely want to watch what Chris Nolan makes, but it can't be. There's a high concentration risk if we just wait for Chris Nolan to produce good stuff. So I would like to see that the mainstay of film production, and I used Hollywood as an example. I know there's more than that, but the whole piece to be thrown on its head by simply bringing community together from around the world in different languages. Well, that's cool, right? And showing different cultures off and things like that. You know, that's where I want to play.
Very cool. So it's almost like I guess crowdsourcing creativity, right? And then the end-to-end process actually leveraging blockchain to do that. Really cool. I mean, I guess, you know, whilst we're on the kind of culture side of things, we're seeing it in the art world too, right? Where, you know, blockchain is beginning to get involved, whether that be by bringing real world art onto the blockchain and kind of creating a legacy for it in a digital realm, or it's even, I think is it the Belvedere Museum in Austria? I think they brought the Kiss painting onto the blockchain, fractionalized it, and people could basically buy one part of the painting as an NFT and kind of secure that forever. But it also gave you kind of community governance to the museum itself, access to all kinds of new and interesting stuff. I thought it was a really nice use case. Nikhil, there is so much going on at EMURGO and Cardano in general. What's new? What's exciting? What do we need to know about?
Right. So at EMURGO, we've really beefed up our team to really go out there aggressively, proactively engage the existing Cardano community and understand what are people working on, where are the gaps, how can we crystallize some kind of Cardano opportunity, that too, a commercial opportunity for Cardano players. I think it's fair to say a lot of this space is very tech heavy. So where people or projects might be missing some skill set is the marketing side, the business development, or indeed outright sales. So this is where we are looking to work with projects, and we will be moving forward, starting to incubate some of these things. That's within Cardano. We're equally eager to talk to, you know, projects who have built on other layer ones or layer twos and understand, why aren't you coming to Cardano? Like is there a thing that we can do there together? And then thirdly, outside blockchain altogether, we are going proactively out to Web2 companies and saying, let us work with you. If you've got a POC that you're interested in building, we can do that with you. And really, this is all with a view to bringing more folks into the ecosystem to really push commercial adoption and increase that TVL in the ecosystem. And apart from that, between now and the middle of next year, we're going to be rolling out a series of workshops that allows people to understand what is all of this work that's happening around governance, around the constitution, and ultimately moving Cardano to a space where it will be the most decentralized blockchain in the world. So more information will come out on that. If you're interested to understand how is that going to work, please look out for it, and you're more than welcome to join us at those workshops.
Amazing. There's so much going on. So if people do want to reach out and find out more about this, where should they go to find out about EMURGO? Can they find you on Twitter or elsewhere?
Yep. So our website is emurgo.io.
That's the easy one.
That's the easy one. I'm I'm quiet on Twitter.
Yeah.
Just because I find it a lot of information overload, but I am on LinkedIn. So look for Nikhil Joshi EMURGO.
Amazing. Cool. Well, Nikhil, listen, it's been such a pleasure to have you on. And we've talked about so many things. I didn't know we were going to go into music, film, art. Awesome. So yeah, really, really big thanks to you for coming on. It's been such a pleasure. Yeah.
Can I do my Chewbacca impression as reciprocation for thanking me?
Yes.
Okay, 1 second.
Prepare yourselves. Round of applause in the room. Round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Amazing. Nikhil, thank you so much for coming
Thank
on.
you. Thanks for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to see more where this came from, then please do click like and subscribe. We've got lots more coming up. And yeah, thanks for tuning in.